How much longer is your mom going to live? I don't want to wait another 10 years just to get our share of the house. Margaret froze behind the oak door, standing still in the dim hallway of the suburban home just south of Springfield, Missouri. No one knew she was there. No one knew she had heard. She had spent her entire life raising her son, walking him to school through the snow on winter mornings, cutting her own meals short to save up for his college tuition. Now, at 73, she lived alone in a small apartment bought with her meager pension as a retired nurse. That morning, she'd gotten a call. "Mom, I've got a high fever, probably the flu." She didn't wait for an Uber. She got behind the wheel of her old pickup truck and drove more than 50 miles through slick, hilly roads in the chill of Missouri's early spring, just to care for her son. What she didn't expect was that waiting for her wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a hug. It was a question about when she was going to die. She had never sought the spotlight. No fancy college degree, no stock portfolio, no $1 million savings. But she had been a nurse, one of the steadfast ones working night shifts at the local hospital, tending to patients right up until her retirement. She was the kind of woman typical of the post-war generation, where sacrifice was a given and motherhood was sacred. She wasn't tech-savvy. She didn't use credit cards. She still wrote bills out by hand and preferred her landline to a cell phone. But one thing she never forgot was her love for her only son, Andrew. She gave birth to Andrew at 36, after years of infertility treatments. When her husband died from a stroke while Andrew was just 12, she played both mother and father. She passed on every opportunity to remarry, never traveled, never splurged. Everything was for her son to have a proper education and a real home. Andrew was now 37, with a wife, 2 kids, and a comfortable 2-story house in the suburbs. A part of that house? Margaret had helped pay the down payment with the life insurance money from her late husband. And her name was still on the deed. She had never questioned any of it. She believed her son was a good man, a grateful man. But just one sentence, "How much longer is your mom going to live?" shattered nearly 50 years of unwavering trust. Margaret stood frozen. Her heartbeat slowed, but her head throbbed, each pulse like a hammer to the skull. That sentence, "When's she going to die so we can split the inheritance?" echoed like a voice from the bottom of a dark well. She didn't know how long she had stood there. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. But in that span of time, everything she had ever believed in began to crack. A mother's love, a lifetime of sacrifice. The nights sewing up torn socks so he'd look decent at school. The times she borrowed money from neighbors to pay his tuition on time. The nights sitting by his bed when he had chickenpox, burning with fever. She used to think, as long as my child grows up to be a decent man, it'll all be worth it. But maybe she had been wrong. And worse than wrong, it wasn't just a small mistake. It was a lifetime of misplaced faith. When Margaret was younger, she once heard an old doctor say, "Love is what helps people endure pain, but it's also what blinds them to the knife in their heart." Now she understood what that meant. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the inheritance. It was the pain of being seen as a burden. A living thing, just waiting to die. And suddenly, that 50-mile drive wasn't just a visit to see her son. It was a collision with the truth. A raw, cold truth that made her want to turn back. But she didn't. Not this time. Because there was one thing she now knew with certainty. I've been silent all my life. But this time, I won't stay quiet. Margaret lived a simple life. Truly simple. Every morning, she made coffee with the same old machine from 1998, the kind with paper filters and a soft sputtering noise as it brewed. She liked sitting by the window, watching the maple trees change with the seasons, circling crossword clues in the newspaper like a sacred ritual. In her little apartment, most of the things were older than some people she knew. An old RCA radio, a worn leather armchair where she knitted, and a single-framed photo on the wall, Andrew at 5 years old, clinging to her neck, laughing with pure joy. Each afternoon, she brought leftovers to a stray cat in the parking lot. Others found it bothersome. She found comfort in it. It made her feel useful. And every night, she called Andrew just to ask small things. Are you sleeping enough? Work stressing you out? Are the kids eating their veggies? The answers were usually, yeah, sometimes with a sigh of impatience. But she never minded. She always thought, if my son hears my voice every day, I'll live one more day. Margaret belonged to a generation that believed love didn't need repayment, only presence. She never asked for anything. Never blamed anyone. The apartment she lived in was bought with her own savings. The truck she drove? Her late husband had bought it for her. She kept it as a way of holding on to memory. She never thought much about death. But she used to imagine, one day, I'll slip away quietly. And my son will read my journal, find the letters I've tucked in the drawer, and know how deeply he was loved. But now, that sentence, when's she going to die, had awakened something else. Maybe she'd been quiet for too long. And maybe that silence had taught people how to forget. There was one thing Margaret had believed her whole life. Love was enough. As long as you love your child with all your heart, with everything a mother has, your child will know how to love you back. To her, maternal love is instinctual. It needs no lesson, no document, no legal protection. She never wrote a will. Not because she was rich, but because she thought, I only have him. Who else would I write one for? The old car, she planned to leave it to Andrew. The apartment, she intended to gradually transfer it over, asking for nothing in return. Her remaining savings, not much, but enough to cover her grandson's college tuition. She had already set up a monthly automatic transfer until he turned 18. All of it was out of love. But after that night, when she overheard those words, she began to remember. She remembered his last birthday. She had waited over 2 hours at the bakery just to pick up the exact cake he used to love as a child, vanilla frosting, a baseball design, and the words, "To my precious son." Andrew arrived late. As soon as he walked in, he said, "Mom, we're on a diet. You don't need to buy cake anymore." She remembered the time she offered to move closer to help take care of her grandson. Her daughter-in-law gave an awkward smile. We're kind of used to our privacy." She didn't say anything, just nodded, and told herself, maybe they're just tired. She remembered the time she fell in the kitchen and lay there for nearly an hour before she could get up. She mentioned it the next day during a phone call. Andrew only replied, "Oh, Mom, you have to be more careful. I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back." No one ever called back. It wasn't their fault. It was hers. She never set boundaries. She never taught her son how to show respect. She had confused love with submission. And now, as she recalled each tiny detail, the glances, the gestures, the times she was overlooked, she realized. I wasn't betrayed suddenly. I was just the last one to open my eyes. People don't change overnight. Just like winter doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, through the leaves, the breeze, the long silences between two people who once shared everything. Margaret had spent a lifetime sacrificing. But now she understood. Sacrifice that goes unnoticed is just fading into the background. And a person who fades away will, sooner or later, be written out of their own family story. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She sat in her old armchair, holding a notebook. Wobbly lines began to form, her first in many years. I'm still alive. I still have worth. I'm not anyone's shadow. She wrote it as if affirming something deep inside her, as if knocking on her own heart. And then, she typed into the computer for the first time in years, how to write a will in California. She read the laws. She read blogs. She even watched tutorial videos. Not to punish anyone, but to protect what remained of her life. She used to think protecting her child meant securing the future. Now she understood. Sometimes, protecting yourself is the most important lesson a mother can teach. The next morning, she called a lawyer. Her voice was calm and steady. "Hello, this is Margaret Williams. I'd like to restructure my entire estate plan." And for the first time in a long time, she felt powerful. Not because of money, but because she finally understood. Love, no matter how deep, must be placed in the right hands, the right heart, the right way. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to live the rest of her life wide awake. Margaret said nothing to her son. No reproach. No tears. She returned to her small apartment in Santa Rosa, a quiet town 50 miles outside the city, where she used to grow lavender and wild daisies as a way to preserve tender memories. But something inside her had died, and something else had awakened. 2 weeks later, on a morning in April, her son Andrew received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A paper letter, handwritten, formal, sealed in an envelope bearing the name of a law office in San Francisco. The contents left him frozen. Per the directive of Ms. Margaret Williams, our client, her current estate, including real estate, retirement accounts, and personal stocks, has been transferred into a private trust. Inheritance will no longer default to bloodline distribution, but will instead be determined by the degree of contribution, care, and responsibility shown during the final years of her life. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Margaret. "Andrew, I still love you. But I also love myself. For the first time, I'm learning to choose who deserves my love." Andrew drove to her home that very day. He knocked frantically, his face caught between confusion and anger. Margaret opened the door, still the gentle, silver-haired mother with a slender frame. But her eyes were no longer those of a mother pleading for affection. "I thought you didn't care about that stuff," Andrew said, his voice cracking. Margaret gave a soft smile. "I've cared for far too long, Andrew. The problem was I cared the wrong way." In that moment, the roles reversed. The mother who once feared being a burden now stood firm with clear boundaries. The son who once assumed his mother knew nothing stood silent, unsure what to say. And that was when the power of silence began. American English translation. No need to argue. No need to shout. Just one clear action, and a mother begins to love herself the way she deserves. Silence is always what scares people the most. Not because it's loud, but because it forces us to hear the voice within. Ever since receiving the letter from the law office, Andrew stopped sending thoughtless texts. He no longer checked in like it was a social obligation. He started calling not to ask if his mother still had money, but to ask what she needed. For the first time in years, Andrew installed security cameras around her house. For the first time, he called Margaret's personal doctor to check her medical schedule. And for the first time, he, not his wife, drove her to her regular checkups at Santa Rosa Medical Center. As for Natalie, the daughter-in-law who once saw Margaret as a burden, she now found herself strangely cautious around this silver-haired woman who once only cooked and kept quiet. She realized that woman was never weak. She just chose to be patient because she believed in goodness. And now that patience was gone, the house became quiet but in order. No one dared raise their voice. No one dared bring up inheritance anymore. Something strange began to spread, not from Margaret herself, but from the shift in how others looked at her. Neighbors who once thought Margaret was just a lonely old woman now saw her walking each morning with steady steps and a calm smile. The bank clerk who used to call her sweet old lady now addressed her as Mrs. Williams and asked her to advise her mother on retirement funds. And the young attorney in San Francisco, Samantha, said, "I've met many wealthy women, but few have the strength to reclaim authorship of their own life story the way she did." And that's what Margaret never expected. When she began to respect herself, the world around her started to respect her too. People often teach their children, "Love your mother while she's still alive." But few teach mothers, "Love yourself so others can learn how to love you the right way." Margaret learned that lesson late, but not too late. Because the kind of love she's teaching now isn't the cheap, conditional kind. It's love with boundaries, with weight, and with true value. Margaret bought a plane ticket to Arizona. No one knew. No notice. No need for permission. After 32 years of staying within Santa Rosa, she was traveling for herself for the first time. Not for a sick child. Not for a grandchild calling to borrow money. She went for an old dream she never dared to name. When she was young, Margaret once wanted to learn how to paint. But then she got married, had children, cooked meals, ran a house, and dealt with 1,000 unspoken responsibilities. Her whole life, she had lived as if she were just the background in someone else's painting. But now at 73, she realized something simple yet sharp as a blade. If I don't start painting my own life, then when my eyes close for the last time, no one else will. In Tucson, Arizona, Margaret enrolled in an oil painting class for people over 60. A small class, golden sunlight streaming through the windows, and silver-haired women laughing like children playing with watercolors for the first time. There, no one called her Andrew's mom. No one asked how much she had in her retirement fund. No one judged her by how many years she had cooked for a family. There, she was just Margaret, someone learning how to live again. 1 month later, she returned to California. No announcement. But this time, she didn't return to make her son's favorite stew. She didn't return to sit alone watching TV every night. She came back to buy back her old house, but with a new self. The neighbors were surprised to see her planting lavender again in the backyard. Andrew was stunned to see painting she had made herself hung on the walls signed M. Williams as a declaration that she was her own person. And Natalie? She was no longer the daughter-in-law who saw her mother-in-law as a shadow to avoid. Every time she looked at Margaret, she felt respect. There was something in that old woman that brought peace but could not be dismissed. Margaret began forming a new circle of friends, widows, divorcees, or simply women who wanted to live the rest of their lives with more dignity. They held Wednesday garden talks, each person bringing a story, a sorrow, and an unfulfilled dream. Margaret never told them about overhearing her son. She never mentioned the will. Instead, she said, "I used to think sacrifice was love. But now I know, true love is knowing how to name yourself." The California sky was as gray as Margaret's mood when the door suddenly swung open. Not the wind, but footsteps she knew all too well, now moving with purpose. Andrew and Natalie had returned, not to visit, but to make demands with words as sharp as knives. "Mom," Andrew began, his voice firm, "we need to talk about the house. It's part of the estate, and we have legal rights." Natalie stood beside him, her gaze icy. "You know, we've been covering most of your medical expenses all this time. You can't just make all these decisions alone." Margaret looked at them quietly. Each word pierced her like a needle, but not once did she speak. She remembered the sleepless nights, the whispered conversations she overheard in the living room, and the estate plans they thought she'd never understand. Making plans behind her back. And now, they dared to say those words, as if she were nothing more than a shadow without value. But Margaret wasn't the same anymore. "I am not the property you think I am," she said, her voice low but steady, like a bell ringing in the night. "This house, this life, belongs to me. And I have the papers to prove it." Andrew's eyes widened, his tone rising with a mix of surprise and anger. Natalie looked away, knowing that a direct confrontation would get her nowhere. "Do you really think you can do this?" Andrew asked, half challenge, half disbelief, as if trying to figure out what this old woman had left in her. Margaret gave a soft smile, not one of forgiveness, but the smile of someone seasoned by life, who had nothing left to lose but her freedom. "Try me." The soft golden light in the living room fell across the papers spread out on the table. Margaret sat quietly, her heart like waves crashing against the shore. Every sheet, every signature, was a shield forged from her own hard-won strength. More than a legal battle over assets, This was a battle of heart and mind, where she had to stand firm on aging legs to protect her dignity and her rights. Her attorney, Samantha, emphasized each clause in the newly revised will, drafted after many sleepless nights of thinking and negotiating. Mrs. Williams, this isn't just paperwork. This is a fortress built to stop every scheme and trace of greed. It asserts your full control over your life and estate. Margaret listened, each word breathing new life into her. She knew this careful preparation wasn't just for self-protection, it was also to teach her son and daughter-in-law a lasting lesson about respect and honesty. Outside, Andrew and Natalie weren't about to back down easily. They hired their own lawyer, searched for legal loopholes, and dissected every inch of California estate law. They believed knowledge would win. But they forgot one thing. A mother who has awakened is not someone you can measure with the law alone. This confrontation wasn't just on paper, it was unfolding in each of their souls. Andrew began to look at his mother differently, not as the keeper of a bank account, but as a determined woman who could make him stop and listen. And Natalie, in her moments of solitude, began to wonder, did we ever truly understand her? Or were we just focused on what we could gain? At night, Margaret sat in her old armchair, staring out the window. The streetlights cast shadows of the trees, long and shifting like her life, filled with dark places and flickers of hope. She told herself, life isn't always fair, but I get to choose how I rise and move forward. And she did move forward, not because she had to, but because she deserved a full and free life. The morning sky over Sonoma was bright and clear, like a gentle reminder that after every storm, dawn still comes. Margaret walked into the small meeting room, where all eyes turned toward her, curious, tense, chaotic. In her hand was the official copy of her new will, proof of ownership, authority over the house, and control of her retirement fund. Everything was in her favor. Her voice was calm and firm. I'm not here to argue or divide. I'm here to state one simple truth. I am the owner of my life. And I deserve respect. Andrew and Natalie stayed silent, surprise flickering in their eyes, not because she had nothing, but because she held the true power of preparation and confidence. The family company's head accountant, who had long quietly supported her, presented a clear and honest financial report proving the fairness of the new will. Truth shone through like sunlight slicing into the shadows of greed and deceit. The atmosphere shifted from tense to tranquil. Andrew sighed, his eyes softening with a hint of regret. Mom, maybe we were wrong. Not just about the money, but about how we treated you. Natalie bowed her head, her voice trembling. We didn't understand you. We didn't truly appreciate you. We're sorry. Margaret looked at them, her heart wide open like the ocean. She knew that real victory wasn't in erasing them, but in turning the page to a new chapter. A chapter of forgiveness and respect. I've always been your mother, she said. But now I'm also a woman, independent, strong, and free. Let's start again, not with conflict, but with real love. The story didn't end with a battle over inheritance. It began with a family finally learning how to respect, love, and share not just in words, but through action. And Margaret, the elderly mother with an unbreakable heart, not only reclaimed her estate, she found herself again, a living symbol of strength, wisdom, and grace. After the storm of confrontation, Margaret didn't rush out into the world. She sat by the window, looking out at the empty yard, where golden leaves drifted gently like soft notes in the symphony of life. Each day became a new chapter, no longer a cold war with her children, but a quiet journey toward inner peace. Because Margaret now understood. Life isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about the stillness. The quiet moments. The kind that make life truly meaningful. Peace isn't about avoiding the storm, she whispered. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And so, she began to dance alone, in the rain, with herself. Margaret spent her days journaling, pouring her most private thoughts onto the page, unfinished dreams, hard-earned life lessons, and reflections carved from years of silence. She took slow walks along the little path to the nearby park, a place that once held memories both sweet and bitter. The lush green trees seemed to whisper back to her, stories of resilience, waiting, and the fierce will to live. With every step, Margaret began to rediscover a peace she hadn't felt in years. A peace not granted by anyone else, but a gift she gave herself. Life after upheaval wasn't always rosy, but Margaret had learned something powerful. When we learn to let go, to forgive, and to cherish what truly matters, then peace can find us again, like an old friend, gentle and true. Life is about the moments we find peace within ourselves, she smiled. And that, my dear friends, is the greatest inheritance we can ever leave behind. Margaret realized true strength wasn't in control or possessions, it was buried deep in her spirit. A flame that refused to go out, no matter how harsh the storm. In the soft morning light of Napa Valley, she sat quietly, listening. Birdsong, a gentle breeze through the vineyards, and the heartbeat of the earth itself seemed to breathe new energy into her soul. Strength doesn't come from what you can already do, she reminded herself, her voice a lullaby of her own life. It comes from overcoming the things you once thought you couldn't. Margaret began attending self-growth workshops, learned to meditate, and joined a community of women her age, each one searching for renewed purpose. Every story, every face reflected back a piece of herself. She realized she wasn't alone on this journey. There were days she felt tired, like a flickering lamp in the wind. But the light inside her always burned brighter again. Because Margaret knew, growing older wasn't about fading, it was about becoming. It was a daily lesson, learned through scars and stumbles. Our scars tell the story of our strength, she told herself. And in those stories, we find our true selves. She wrote a letter to her son, not just to mend the relationship, but to pass on a message of patience, respect, and grace. Because life is a long journey, and only when we discover our inner strength can we truly walk it with purpose. Margaret had changed, not because the world around her changed, but because she had looked within and discovered the priceless treasure of a soul that refuses to break. Each morning felt like a blank page, inviting her to trace the lines of destiny with steady hands and a hopeful heart. She stepped out of her small house, each footstep light but sure, walking toward a horizon painted gold by the rising sun over Sonoma. Every ending is just a new beginning, she whispered. A prayer, a promise to herself, and the world. No longer the silent woman who endured quietly, Margaret had become the author of her own story. A story of rebirth, faith, and strength. She opened herself to new opportunities. An art class, volunteering, reconnecting with loved ones she had once lost to the storms of life. On quiet afternoons by Clear Lake, watching the water shimmer beneath the sunset, she felt freedom blossom in every breath. Every peaceful moment was proof of her journey. From heartbreak and hurt to love and forgiveness. Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass, but learning to dance in the rain, she smiled, passing on a message for us all. Margaret understood now. Life is an endless exploration, not just of the world outside, but of our inner landscape. Each day, with every step, she chose to live fully, to love deeply, and to carry the flame of hope into the days ahead. Margaret's life was no longer just a long battle. It became living proof of perseverance and grace. Amid the sharp turns of fate, she had found her light, not from others, but from within. A steady lamp illuminating even the darkest corners. In the tapestry of life, every thread of pain weaves the fabric of our strength, she declared. A message to every soul listening to her story. Margaret knew that none of us are perfect, and no one escapes pain. But what sets us apart is how we rise, how we choose to love, how we choose to forgive. In surrender, She found freedom. Freedom to live a life that was whole and full of meaning. Life might not go as planned, but within every hardship is a hidden lesson. Margaret wanted everyone to understand. Don't wait for someone else to change your life or save you, because real strength lies within. You hold the pen of your own story, she said softly. And it's never too late to write a new chapter, one filled with hope, courage, and love. And with each breath, in each present moment, Margaret sent out her quiet blessing to us all. Be brave enough to move forward, no matter how rough the road, because somewhere ahead, there is always the light of peace and happiness.